Hello. Tonight we are going to walk through feudal Japan, not the one painted in films with heroic duels under falling petals, but the one that actually existed between the late 16th and mid-19th centuries. The romantic image of samurai, geisha, and eternal cherry blossoms collapses the moment you look at how the society was really built. This is not a place of poetic freedom. It is a machine designed to keep everyone exactly where they were born, and most people broke under its weight long before noon. Imagine opening your eyes in a small thatched house at first light. The air smells of damp straw and smoke from the sunken hearth. You already know with absolute certainty what your entire life will be. You did not choose it. Your grandfather's grandfather did not choose it. The decision was made centuries earlier, locked into the four-class system the Tokugawa regime enforced with iron precision. Shinoko, Sho, samurai, peasants, artisans, merchants. That order was not a suggestion. It was law carved into every village register, every tax ledger, every marriage contract. If you were born a peasant, and 9 out of 10 Japanese were rice farming is your prison sentence, passed down unchanged. You cannot become a craftsman. You cannot open a shop. You cannot even leave your village without written permission from the headman, who himself answers to the samurai overseer. Social mobility is not merely difficult, it is legally impossible. The rare exceptions a merchant's son adopted into a samurai family, or a low-ranking warrior elevated by extraordinary battlefield luck, only prove how tightly the system was sealed. For everyone else, the path is fixed at birth. Above the peasants stand the samurai, roughly 6% of the population, theoretically warriors, but in practice, a ruling class living on stipends of rice paid by the farmers below them. They serve a daimyo, who serves the shogun, who in name only serves the emperor. The emperor himself is a ceremonial figure kept in Kyoto, writing poetry and performing rituals, while real power sits in Edo with the Tokugawa shogunate. The shogun decides war, peace, taxes, and executions. The emperor decorates the myth. Below merchants and artisans, officially the bottom of respectable society, exist the Ita and Hinin, the unclean or non-human castes. They handle death, butchering animals, tanning hides, executing criminals, burying the dead. Society pretends they do not exist. They live in segregated hamlets, where identifying marks, cannot marry, or even walk on the same paths as others. Their touch pollutes, their shadow is avoided. Yet every samurai's sword, every farmer's sandals, every noble's drum relied on their labor. And women? They stand outside the official hierarchy altogether. They are appendages to it. A woman's status derives entirely from her father, then her husband. She has no independent rank, no legal personhood separate from the male line. Even in samurai households, a wife could be divorced with a simple 3-line letter and sent back to her family in disgrace, often with children kept by the husband. So here is the blunt truth. If you were dropped into this world as an average person, say, a peasant in 1650, you would almost certainly not survive until midday. Not because you lack courage or strength, but because the system was engineered to extract every calorie and every breath, while offering almost nothing in return. The cherry trees would bloom beautifully above you, indifferent to the child already bent double in the paddy at age 7, or the mother chewing bark to stretch the winter rice, or the outcast skinner, whose very existence is erased from official records. The illusion of grace and discipline that draws us to this era is real, but it rested on top of a foundation most people never saw and were never meant to question. Now picture the cold stone basin waiting outside as dawn breaks, the water untouched by fire. You step out into the grey half-light, barefoot on the packed earth or wooden veranda, depending on your status. The basin sits there year-round, a wide, shallow trough of rough stone, fed by a bamboo pipe or simply rainwater collected overnight. No hearth nearby, no kettle steaming. In feudal Japan, heating water for personal washing was a luxury few could afford daily, And even if you could, the ritual demanded otherwise. This is not about comfort or removing dirt in the modern sense. This is misogi in miniature, the daily echo of Shinto purification from kegare, the spiritual pollution that accumulates simply by living. Contact with blood, death, illness, even strong emotions, or the ordinary mess of human existence. Shinto views purity as the baseline for approaching the kami, the spirits that inhabit everything from trees to tools. Kegare is not moral sin like in Western religions. It is a tangible defilement that clings and must be washed away with water, salt, or other agents. So every morning begins with this act of submission. You scoop the icy water with a ladle or your cupped hands and pour it over your face, neck, arms. No soap as we know it barely existed until much later imports. You might rub a bit of salt on your skin if you're meticulous, but mostly it's raw water, straight from the source, often so cold your fingers go numb after the first scoop. Winter makes it brutal. In the northern domains, or even in Edo during January, the surface might carry a thin skim of ice that you break with your hand. The shock hits your system immediately. Breath catches, muscles tense involuntarily, heart rate spikes. You force yourself to continue, because stopping halfway would leave the kegare only half removed, and that is worse than none at all. For peasants in the fields, this is done quickly before heading to the paddies. For samurai in a castle compound, it might be more formal, with retainers watching to ensure protocol. But the temperature is the same for everyone, unforgiving. Next come the teeth. You take a pinch of salt from a small jar, or a frayed twig from the willow or dogwood tree, the traditional chew stick called yoji or fushi. You rub vigorously. No minty foam, no fluoride. Just abrasive salt or wood fibers scraping plaque, and whatever food remains from last night's thin meal. It works after a fashion, but over years it wears enamel thin and leaves gums receding. Dental pain was common, accepted as part of life. Then, if you are a married woman or a samurai of certain rank, the ohaguro awaits the blackening of teeth. This is not done every morning, but maintained regularly. The solution is iron filings soaked in vinegar or tea, mixed with tannins from nuts or gall, turning into a thick, acrid paste applied with a brush. You paint it on carefully, let it set, rinse. The result is jet black teeth that gleam wetly under light. To us it looks horrifying, like decay accelerated, but to them it signaled maturity, marital fidelity, even loyalty. For samurai men who adopted it, especially in earlier periods or court circles, black teeth showed unwavering service to one lord, the color black symbolizing permanence and restraint. White teeth were for children or barbarians. Black was refined, subdued, adult. For a samurai, the stakes rise higher. The Tokugawa regime obsessed over outward order and discipline. A daimyo or even the shogun himself could order an inspection at any time. Sudden visits to check vassals' readiness, which included personal appearance. Dirty fingernails, unkempt hair, or a stain on the kimono could mean demotion, loss of stipend, or worse. Cleanliness here was not hygiene in our clinical sense. It was spiritual duty made visible, proof that you controlled your body, and thus your impulses. A spot of grime signaled inner disorder, a crack in the facade of loyalty. Yet this same insistence on purity could kill slowly. Winter mornings in unheated houses, repeated exposure to freezing water without recovery time, weakened resistance. Pneumonia, frostbite on extremities, chronic joint pain, these were not rare. People endured because the alternative was spiritual disgrace, worse than physical suffering in a worldview where the soul's state mattered more than the body's comfort. You finish the ritual shivering, skin prickling, teeth stinging from salt. The day has barely started, but you have already performed an act of endurance most modern people would call torture. And you do it again tomorrow, and the day after, because the alternative is to carry impurity forward into every interaction, every prayer, every bow to a superior. As the first real light touches the thatched roof, and you turn back inside to face whatever meager breakfast awaits, The cold still lingers in your bones like a reminder. Submission begins before the sun fully rises. With the morning mist still clinging to the fields, you partake in a meager meal that mirrors the bitterness of social divides, where every grain carries the weight of hunger and hidden defiance. You sit on the floor beside the sunken hearth, knees drawn up, back straight out of habit. The fire has burned low overnight. Only a few embers glow under the ash. No chairs, no table in the peasant house, just tatami or packed earth, a low tray if you're lucky. Breakfast is the same as dinner and often lunch, whatever stretch from yesterday. For the vast majority, that means starch, starch, and more starch. If the previous harvest was decent and the tax collector left enough behind, you might have white rice polished, short grain, the prestige food of Japan. More often it's mixed, rice blended with barley, millet or buckwheat to make it go further. The proportion of cheaper grains rises as the year wears on. By spring, before the new crop, many families are down to straight barley or millet porridge, sometimes flavoured with a scrap of pickled radish or wild greens gathered from the roadside. Turnips, sweet potatoes when they became common later in the period, or dried daikon. These are the fillers. Protein comes rarely. A small dried sardine shared among 6, fermented soybeans, if the household can spare the labour to make them. Maybe river fish once a month, if the local stream hasn't been overfished or poisoned by upstream runoff. Meat, officially forbidden. Buddhist doctrine, reinforced by imperial edicts from as early as the 7th century and repeated under Tokugawa, declared the flesh of 4-footed animals unclean. Publicly, everyone nodded. Privately, almost everyone ate it when they could. A cow or horse that died naturally from exhaustion, disease, old age was butchered in secret by the eater, then distributed through back channels. The meat went into stews or dried strips, disguised as mountain whale in euphemism. Wild boar, deer, even fox or raccoon dog appeared on tables in remote villages or among soldiers on campaign. But for the average peasant family, red meat was a rumour, something the samurai or rich merchants might have without apology. Samurai households ate better on paper. Their stipend came in koku of rice enough, in theory, for a comfortable life. In practice, many lower-ranking retainers received barely subsistence amounts, especially after inflation eroded the value of rice stipends against rising urban prices. Still, breakfast in a samurai residence looked different. White rice, always white for status. Miso soup with tofu or seaweed, perhaps pickled vegetables. A grilled fish if the household could afford it. The catch they rarely ate it hot. Protocol demanded the lord eat first. Retainers waited, sometimes hours, until the daimyo or his wife finished. By then the rice had cooled to room temperature, the soup congealed into a skin, the fish dried out. Eating cold food became a mark of discipline, a small daily proof of loyalty. The hypocrisy around meat ran deep. Buddhist temples preached vegetarianism, yet many monks kept private kitchens with chicken or wild game. Daimyo hosted banquets with lavish seafood and game birds while publicly upholding the taboo. The rule was never about health or ethics in the modern sense. It was about control, controlling desire, controlling contact with death, controlling the boundary between human and animal. Hunger was structural. Crop failure struck regularly. Typhoons, early frosts, volcanic eruptions, blanketing fields in ash, as in 1783 with Mount Osama. Insect plagues. In bad years, entire regions faced famine. People ate tree bark, grass roots, clay mixed with rice bran, anything to fill the stomach. In the worst documented cases, the Tenmei famine of 1782, 1788, or earlier regional disasters, records show villages turning to infanticide to reduce mouths or outright cannibalism, parents eating children who had already died, or strangers exhuming fresh graves. Officials suppressed the numbers, but surviving accounts from local chronicles and missionary reports leave no doubt it happened. Sake provided escape and calories. Brewed from rice, It carried roughly the same energy density as the grain itself, but in liquid form that could be absorbed faster. For laborers, it doubled as painkiller, numb the ache in the back after 12 hours bent over seedlings, dull the hunger pangs at night. Drunkenness was tolerated in peasants because a slightly dulled workforce was still a working workforce. Samurai drank too, though public excess could cost them their position. And then there is the contrast that stings most when viewed from today. While rural families scraped by on diluted gruel, the urban elite practiced chanoyu, the tea ceremony, with exquisite precision. Powdered matcha whisked in a ceramic bowl chosen for its imperfections, served in a silent room designed for contemplation. Every movement choreographed, every utensil imbued with wabi-sabi aesthetics. The ceremony celebrated restraint, seasonality, the beauty of the ephemeral, yet it took place in houses where the pantry held enough rice to feed a village for months. The same society that produced that refined ritual also produced children who died with swollen bellies from kwashiorkor because the family rice had gone to taxes. You finish your bowl, a few spoonfuls of barley mush, a sliver of pickle that tastes mostly of salt. The stomach registers fullness without satisfaction. Outside, the mist begins to lift. The day's labor waits, planting, weeding, repairing dikes. Another meal like this in 12 hours, if the weather holds. As you set the empty bowl aside and rise to face the fields, the quiet resentment settles deeper, not loud rebellion, but the slow, generational burn of knowing the system feeds on your hunger, while others perform ceremonies over empty bowls of their own. Beneath the soft glow of midday sun, your flesh becomes a canvas of endurance, marked by the slow decay of rituals and the pervasive scents that linger like unspoken secrets in the air. Start with the mouth. The diet heavy in polished rice, barley, millet, with almost no sugar beyond the occasional fruit or honey should in theory spare the teeth from rapid decay. No candy, no soda, no frequent snacking on sweets. Yet dental health was poor across classes. Sticky starches clung to molars and lodged between teeth. Without effective cleaning beyond salt and twig, plaque built up steadily. Caries existed, though differently from today. Less rampant pitting from sucrose. More root caries and periodontal disease from chronic abrasion and bacterial overgrowth. Abscesses formed, jaws swelled, teeth loosened, and fell out by the 30s or 40s. Pain was constant background noise endured because extraction meant a blacksmith's pliers or a barber's knife, no anesthesia, high risk of infection. Samurai might have better access to imported medicines or skilled tooth pullers, but even daimyo-level retainers often went toothless in old age. Skin told its own story, especially among the upper classes who could afford cosmetics. Women of samurai and merchant families and some court ladies applied oshiroi, a thick white lead-based paste to face, neck, and sometimes chest. The goal was porcelain uniformity, erasing natural tone and any blemish. Lead carbonate, basic lead carbonate, mixed with rice powder or animal fat, created the desired matte white. It looked ethereal in candlelight, signaling refinement and distance from outdoor labor. The cost was poisoning. Chronic lead absorption through skin and accidental ingestion caused anemia, neurological damage, infertility, miscarriages, and early death. Symptoms: fatigue, constipation, wrist drop, cognitive fog were often misattributed to other causes. Yet the practice persisted for centuries because beauty standards trumped health, and no one connected the pallor to the toxin until much later Western influence. Tattooing carried no romantic connotation in this era. Before the Edo period's decorative ukiyo-e style emerged among firemen and laborers, irizumi meant punishment. Criminals convicted of serious offenses, theft, arson, murder, were branded with black ink patterns on face, arms or back, lines, rings, or characters indicating the crime and place of conviction. The marks were permanent disfigurement, making escape or reintegration impossible. Society read them instantly. The bearer became an outcast, even after sentence completion. Decorative tattoos only gained traction later among lower urban classes. still carrying stigma as something rough and criminal adjacent. Parasites were universal. No soap in the modern sense, just occasional ash lye or plant saponins meant skin stayed dirty longer, especially in humid summers. In cities like Edo or Osaka, population density turned streets into open sewers. Night soil collected for fertilizer was carted through alleys daily. Intestinal worms, roundworms, hookworms, tapeworms infected most people from childhood. Eggs came from contaminated water, undercooked fish, or fertilized vegetables. Symptoms ranged from mild bloated stomach, fatigue, to severe anemia, malnutrition, intestinal blockage. Children grew slower, adults weakened faster. No widespread deworming existed. Folk remedies like pumpkin seeds or herbs helped sporadically at best. The smell defined daily life more than most accounts admit. People bathed infrequently by our standards. Full immersion, perhaps weekly, at a public bathhouse for city dwellers, less for rural poor. Sweat, urine traces, fermented food odours, smoke from open hearths, all layered over unwashed hair and clothing. In crowded tenements or castle barracks, the composite stench could be overpowering. Nobility countered it with incense, agar wood, sandalwood, cloves burned in private rooms or carried in sleeves. The practice was aesthetic, yes, but also functional, a cloud of smoke to mask the underlying human reality. Lower classes had no such buffer. The air simply carried what bodies produced. Beauty, in this context, was often lethal in slow motion. Lead paint shortened lives quietly. Tight obi sashes restricted breathing and digestion over years. Bound feet never took hold in Japan, but rigid posture and layered kimono in summer heat caused heat stroke and fungal infections. The pursuit of an ideal form, pale, composed, odorless, demanded constant war against the natural body, and the body usually lost. You stand in the field or courtyard now, midday heat pressing down. Sweat runs into eyes already stinging from smoke and dust. A tooth throbs dully, skin itches under rough fabric. The air smells of wet earth, manure, distant incense drifting from a lord's residence. This is not decay in the dramatic sense, no sudden plague sores or battlefield gangrene. This is the quiet, cumulative wearing away of a body forced to serve longer than it was built to last. As the sun climbs higher and work resumes without pause, you feel the slow arithmetic of endurance. Another day subtracted, another small debt added to the flesh. Amid the endless expanse of flooded paddies under a relentless sky, you toil in the mud that sustains empires, where each step sinks deeper into a life bound by earth and endless obligation. You are a peasant. That single fact defines 90% of everyone in feudal Japan. The other 10% samurai, artisans, merchants, outcasts exist because you produce the surplus that feeds them. Your labor is the literal foundation. Without the rice you grow, the entire edifice collapses. Yet the system treats you as replaceable machinery, not as a person with rights or future. The day starts before full light and ends after dark, 6 or 7 days a week, with only festival days or New Year offering real breaks. Rice cultivation is unforgiving. From early spring you prepare seed beds, transplant seedlings by hand into ankle to knee-deep water, weed by bending double for hours, repair dikes after every rain, scare birds and wild boars with clappers or stones. Summer heat turns the paddies into steam baths. Sweat mixes with mud until your skin feels like a second, cracking layer. Mosquitoes swarm. Leeches attach to calves and thighs. You feel them only when they drop off bloated. Snakes, mamushi, vipers among them hide in the dikes. A bite means days of agony or death if untreated. In autumn you harvest, thresh, winnow, dry. Winter brings maintenance, repairing tools, mending roofs, gathering firewood, but also the cold that seeps into bones already worn from constant wet. Taxes take 40 to 60% of the harvest, depending on the domain and the year. The assessment is based on kokudaka theoretical yield per field fixed decades earlier. and rarely adjusted downward even when soil depletes or weather turns bad. You pay in polished rice, delivered to the village granary under samurai supervision. Hide even a single sack, and it's treason, flogging, exile, or execution for the household. Shortfall means debt recorded against the village as a whole. Next year's taxes rise to cover it. The burden falls heaviest on the poorest households, who borrow from richer neighbours or merchants at ruinous rates. Default spirals into land forfeiture or indentured labour. The village headman Shoya or Nanushi is your immediate overseer, but he holds no real power. He is the buffer between peasants and samurai. When taxes fall short or unrest brews, he is the first blamed, the first beaten, the first replaced. Samurai rarely enter the village except to collect or punish. They prefer to keep distance and let the headman absorb the hatred. He collects the rice, keeps the registers, reports births, deaths, marriages. He is peasant-born, but his position makes him a target. Most headmen age quickly under the strain. Housing reflects the same economy of survival. A typical peasant dwelling is a single-room structure of wattle and daub walls, thatched roof, dirt floor. One open hearth in the center for cooking and heat. Smoke escapes through the roof, blackening beams and lungs. The family parents, children, perhaps grandparents or in-laws, sleeps on straw mats around the fire. Livestock, a horse or ox if the household can afford it. Chickens, maybe a pig. Share the space in winter for warmth and to prevent theft. Privacy does not exist. Disease spreads easily. Tuberculosis, dysentery, smallpox epidemics sweep through crowded rooms. No chimney means constant eye irritation and respiratory issues. You cannot leave. The Tokugawa system tied peasants to their land through strict residency laws. Travel required a pass from the headman, countersigned by the domain office. Reasons had to be legitimate pilgrimage, family emergency, official business, and even then limited in duration. Runaways were hunted as criminals. Captured ones faced public flogging or worse, their families punished collectively. The goal was simple: prevent flight to cities, prevent tax evasion, prevent ideas of change from spreading. Bad harvests turn routine hardship into catastrophe. When typhoons flood fields, drought cracks the earth, or locusts strip leaves, the stored surplus vanishes fast. Families eat the seed rice meant for next year, then forage, acorns, fern roots, wild yams, pine bark boiled into mush. Children chew on anything fibrous. In extreme years, the Kyoho famine of 1732, Tenmei of 1782, 88, Tempo of 1833, 37 tens of thousands died. Corpses lay unburied until officials ordered mass graves. Infanticide became common. Thinning. Mabiki of newborns to preserve food for the older children who could work. The practice was condemned, but quietly tolerated because the alternative was watching the whole family starve. You pause at midday under a tree or in the dike's shade, if the overseer allows. A quick meal of cold rice balls or leftover gruel. Water from the irrigation channel. No rest beyond that. The sun beats down again. Muscles cramp from constant stooping. Back pain becomes chronic by age 25. Women work the same fields while pregnant, nursing infants tied to their backs. Children start weeding at 5 or 6. By 12, they do adult labor. Life expectancy hovers in the mid-30s for those who survive childhood diseases. Yet the fields keep producing because you have no alternative. Rebellion is rare and usually suicidal. The 1783 Ueda Uprising, the 1836 Chichibu Rebellion crushed quickly, leaders crucified or boiled. Most peasants endure in silence, passing the same life to their children. The empire stands on your bent back. The samurai swords are fed by your rice. The tea ceremony's quiet elegance rests on your empty stomach. As the afternoon drags and your feet sink deeper into the sucking mud, you glance toward the distant castle on the hill, symbol of protection that never arrives, and understand that this is not a day's work. This is the rest of your existence. In the hushed halls of a daimyo's castle, you grip the hilt of honor that cuts both ways, a path of unwavering loyalty where one misstep echoes through eternity. You are a samurai. The word conjures images of flashing blades and stoic resolve, but the reality was narrower and more suffocating. You are not a free warrior choosing battles. You are a hereditary retainer, bound to a single lord by oaths that your ancestors swore, oaths renewed at every generation. Your life is service, and service means absolute obedience. The daimyo's word is law, not because he is wise or just, but because he holds your stipend, your rank, your family's survival. His mood sets the tone of your day. A frown at breakfast can mean reduced duties or worse. A moment of favor can bring a temporary increase in rice allowance or a better posting. You live inside his weather. Bushido, the way of the warrior, is often presented today as a timeless code of chivalry. In the Tokugawa period, it was less a philosophy and more a practical set of expectations enforced by social pressure and the threat of ruin. Loyalty above all, courage in the face of death, self-control, frugality, readiness to die for the Lord. The code did not forgive weakness, failure, or even the appearance of failure. A single lapse losing your temper in public, failing to anticipate your Lord's needs, allowing a scandal to touch the household could end your career. There was no appeal process, no second chances in most cases. The system demanded perfection not because it believed in human perfectibility, but because any crack threatened the hierarchy. Seppuku was the prescribed exit for disgrace. It was not romantic suicide. It was ritualized execution by one's own hand, often ordered by superiors as an alternative to beheading or family-wide punishment. The act required composure, kneeling on white cloth, dressed formally, cutting the abdomen from left to right, and sometimes upward in a second motion. Then if a second was present, having the head severed cleanly to end suffering. Witnesses judged the performance as much as the act itself. A steady hand and calm expression proved that even in death you retained control. Refusal meant worse: crucifixion, burning, or the extinction of your house. Seppuku happened regularly enough that manuals existed detailing the protocol, and families prepared sons for the possibility from youth. Your two swords daisho were the visible markers of your status. The katana and wakizashi together signified the right to kill commoners who showed disrespect kirisute gomen, but they also carried heavy responsibility. You wore them constantly in public, maintained them meticulously, never drew them lightly. Losing a sword, allowing it to rust, or worst, having it fall to the ground in front of others, was a profound humiliation. The blades were not just weapons, they were your identity, proof that you belonged to the military class even when, in peacetime, you spent more hours on paperwork than on training. Finances eroded the myth of samurai prosperity. Stipends were paid in koku of rice. One koku theoretically fed one person for a year. A low-ranking samurai might receive 20-50 koku, barely enough for a small family after expenses. Inflation, especially in the later Edo period, made rice prices volatile. When urban demand drove costs up, the real value of the stipend fell. Many samurai sold portions of their rice allowance in advance at discounted rates to merchants, just to get cash for daily needs. By the 18th and 19th centuries, large numbers of hatamoto and lower retainers lived in poverty worse than prosperous peasants. They pawned armor, took side jobs, officially forbidden, or relied on loans from merchants they officially despised. Some daimyo domains went bankrupt trying to support bloated samurai roles, forcing pay cuts or forced retirements. Women's samurai onobugeisha existed, but were marginal. In earlier centuries, particularly during the Sengoku Wars, some women from warrior families trained in weapons and defended homes or fought alongside men. Tomoe Gozen in the 12th century is the famous example, but by Tokugawa times such figures were rare. Women in samurai households learned naginata for home defense, and a few managed estates while husbands campaigned or served in Edo under Sankin Kotai. Yet they remained subordinate. No independent stipends, no formal rank separate from father or husband, no right to seppuku in the same ritual form. Their role was support, not leadership. The 47 Ronin stand as the starkest illustration of the price of honor. In 1701, Asano Naganori, a young daimyo, drew his sword in Edo Castle, a capital offense, and wounded Kira Yoshinaka after months of alleged provocation and humiliation. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku immediately. His house was abolished. His retainers made masterless ronin. For 2 years they planned in secret, living as merchants or laborers to avoid suspicion. In 1703, they attacked Kira's mansion, killed him, then surrendered. The shogunate sentenced them to seppuku rather than common execution, a concession to their status, and they all performed it. The story was celebrated in kabuki and bunraku as loyalty and duty perfected. But examine it coldly. 47 men destroyed their futures, their families' futures, and ended their bloodlines for the sake of avenging a lord who had already paid with his life for a moment of rage. The system did not reward restraint. It demanded total commitment, even when the cause was questionable. You walk the castle corridors, swords at your side, senses tuned to every shift in your lord's expression. One wrong word, one delayed response, one rumor of disloyalty, and the blade turns inward. The honor you carry is real, but it is also a noose tight, unyielding, and indifferent to your personal desires. As evening falls and lanterns are lit along the verandas, you bow once more to the man whose whim decides whether you live as a warrior or die as a lesson. Within the flickering light of workshops and bustling markets, you craft and trade in the undercurrents of society, where ingenuity clashes with disdain in the smoke-filled rhythm of daily survival. You are neither peasant nor samurai. You belong to the 3rd or 4th rung, artisan or merchant. In the official 4-class hierarchy, Shinoko, show you rank below farmers because you do not produce food from the earth. The reasoning was Confucian. Those who create tangible goods, artisans, contribute more than those who merely move goods around merchants. So craftsmen, swordsmiths, carpenters, dyers, potters, weavers sit one step above traders. But both groups are labelled commoners, below the military nobility. Samurai are taught from childhood that merchants are parasites who profit without labour, living off the sweat of others. Artisans at least make something useful, but they are still simple people, not entitled to wear 2 swords or carry themselves with the restrained arrogance of the warrior class. The disdain is formal and constant. A merchant entering a samurai residence must crawl on hands and knees if ordered. A craftsman might be permitted to stand, but never to look a samurai directly in the eye for long. Public protocol reinforced the ranking daily. Seating order at festivals, priority at bridges, who steps aside on narrow streets. Yet the reality diverged sharply as the Edo period wore on. By the mid-18th century, many merchants were accumulating serious wealth. Cities like Osaka and Edo grew into commercial hubs. Rice brokers, sake brewers, textile wholesalers, money changers. These men handled the domain stipends that samurai converted to cash. They lent money to daimyo strapped for funds after Sankin Kotai processions to Edo, which drained treasuries with lavish travel and gifts. Interest rates were high. Collateral often included future rice deliveries. When domains defaulted, merchants gained influence quietly, forgiven debts in exchange for political favors, or outright control over domain finances through hidden partnerships. Some merchant houses, the Mitsui, Konoike, Sumitomo, became proto-banks, financing trade across domains and even overseas through restricted channels. Samurai, meanwhile, watched their rice stipends lose purchasing power against rising urban prices. Inflation hit hardest those on fixed allowances. A low-ranking retainer might earn 30 koku, theoretically adequate, but after selling the rice at market rates that fell year by year, he struggled to feed his family. By the late period, intermarriage became common. A samurai house with name, but no money, wedded a daughter to a merchant's son for the dowry, or a merchant bought status by marrying his daughter into a poor samurai lineage. The arrangement was mutually beneficial on paper prestige for cash, but it quietly undermined the official order. The shogunate frowned, but rarely intervened. The economy needed the merchants too much. Guilds, za, or kabunakama structured much of this world. Membership was hereditary or bought at steep prices. They controlled production standards, raw material access, market shares, and prices within a city or trade. A swordsmith belonged to the sword guild, a silk weaver to the textile association. The guild protected against outsiders undercutting prices and ensured quality for reputation. But the control was suffocating. Quotas limited output, innovations required approval, fines punished deviation. Breaking guild rules could mean expulsion, economic death in a closed system. The shogunate tolerated guilds because they collected taxes more efficiently than individual assessments, but periodically cracked down when monopolies drove prices too high or stifled needed goods. City life amplified every pressure. Edo reached over 1 million people by 1800. Osaka and Kyoto were not far behind. Wooden machiya houses packed tightly together, narrow alleys, open sewers. Fires swept through regularly. The flowers of Edo. They called them because lanterns, cooking fires, and paper screens fed blazes that consumed entire neighborhoods in hours. After the Great Meireki Fire of 1657 that killed perhaps 100,000, rebuilding used the same flammable materials because wood was cheap and abundant. Disease thrived in the density. Cholera, dysentery, smallpox outbreaks killed thousands annually. No sanitation system existed beyond night soil collectors who carted waste to rural fields. Water came from wells or aqueducts, often contaminated. Yet merchants and artisans had advantages peasants envied: cash income, access to markets, the chance to accumulate savings. A successful draper or pawnbroker could afford better food, private baths, even literacy tutors for children. Their houses might have 2 stories, sliding doors with painted scenes, small gardens. They patronized kabuki, ukiyo-e artists, tea houses. In private, they lived better than many samurai who maintained appearances on dwindling stipends. The contrast is the core irony. Formal contempt masked real power. The merchant bowed low in public, but his ledger determined whether a daimyo ate next month. The artisan crafted the armor and tools that symbolized samurai superiority, yet remained low. The system ranked them last because it feared their independence, money, and skill that could not be taxed or controlled as easily as land and rice. They were essential, therefore suspect. You close your workshop shutters as night settles over the city. Lanterns reflect in puddles from the day's rain. Somewhere a firewatch bell rings faintly. Tomorrow the market opens again, and you will trade, craft, profit, all while keeping your head lowered in the presence of those who depend on you more than they admit. On the fringes of villages shrouded in twilight, you exist as a shadow among shadows, bearing the burden society casts away in silent judgment and unyielding exclusion. You are Eta, or Hinin, the 2 overlapping categories the Tokugawa regime officially designated as unclean or non-human. The terms were not mere insults, they were legal status. Eta handled tasks involving death, butchering cattle and horses that died naturally, tanning hides into leather, making shoes and saddles from animal skin, disposing of executed criminals' bodies. Hinin included executioners, guards at execution grounds, street sweepers who cleared refuse and human waste, performers of certain polluting entertainments like begging or corpse removal. The distinction blurred in practice. Both groups were treated as untouchable. Their very presence defiled a samurai stepping on the same ground. An Eta had walked could require purification. Official documents often omitted their existence entirely. Village registers listed them separately or not at all. They lived in segregated hamlets, usually outside village boundaries, or on the edges of towns, places called buraku in later terminology. Houses were poorer than peasant dwellings, smaller, flimsier, often without proper flooring. Clothing marked them visibly: short-sleeved jackets or specific patches on kimono sleeves, straw sandals instead of geta, sometimes a particular hairstyle or cap. These markers were enforced by law and custom. Removing them risked severe punishment. Marriage across status lines was forbidden. Ita could only marry Ita, Hinin only Hinin. Children inherited the status automatically, generation after generation. Escape was impossible without rare official pardons, which almost never happened. The work itself was essential yet despised. Samurai needed leather for armor straps, scabbards, horse tack. Peasants needed sandals and plough parts. Merchants traded hides for export. Every sword sheath, every drumhead, every pair of boots traced back to Eta labor. Yet the handlers of dead animals or dead humans carried permanent kegare spiritual pollution. Contact required avoidance. No shared wells, no shared roads, no shared festivals. When an Eta entered a regular village for trade, people scattered or covered their faces. Payment for services was often left on the ground to avoid hand-to-hand exchange. Women occupied an even more precarious position, not a separate caste, but structurally outside the hierarchy's protections. In the official Shino-ko-sho system, rank passed through males. A woman had no independent standing. She derived her place from father, husband, or if widowed, son. In samurai households, she managed the home, raised heirs, sometimes oversaw retainers, but remained legal property. A husband could divorce her by writing a simple document, mikudarihan, 3.5 lines stating intent to separate. No court approval needed, no reason required. She returned to her natal family in disgrace, often without children, who stayed with the father's line to preserve inheritance. Remarriage was difficult, her value diminished. Exceptions existed, but they were narrow. During the Sengoku period, and even into early Tokugawa, some women from warrior families on Abugeisha managed estates, while husbands served in Edo under the alternate attendant system or fought in distant campaigns. They issued orders, collected taxes, defended against bandits. A few trained with naginata or firearms for home defense, but these were pragmatic necessities, not rights. When the husband returned, control reverted. No woman held formal fief or stipend in her own name. By the mid-Edo period, such autonomy shrank as peace stabilized and Confucian ideals tightened gender roles. At the furthest extreme stood the women of the licensed pleasure quarters, Yoshiwara in Edo, Shimabara in Kyoto, Shinmachi in Osaka. They were called flowers in popular literature. Geisha, oiran, Taiyu trained in music, dance, poetry, conversation. To outsiders they appeared as embodiments of refined beauty, elaborate kimono, white makeup, black lacquered teeth. In reality, most were indentured. Families sold daughters into contracts lasting 10 to 20 years to settle debts or survive famine. Once inside the quarter, escape was nearly impossible. High debts for clothing, lessons, room and board accumulated faster than earnings. The madam, often a former courtesan, controlled every aspect of life. Physical coercion, surveillance by guards, legal barriers kept them in place. They serviced clients from merchants to samurai, but their status remained that of chattel bought, sold, traded between houses. Pregnancy usually meant abortion or abandonment of the child to the quarter's orphanage system. Old age brought poverty or beggary. Few retired wealthy. The key fact is structural dependence. The entire social order rested on groups it refused to acknowledge as fully human. Peasants fed the system, Eta cleaned its corpses and tanned its leather. Women reproduced its heirs and managed its households. Courtesans absorbed its excesses and frustrations. Without them, the machine stopped. Yet the ideology erased their personhood to preserve the illusion of purity and order above. Samurai could perform seppuku with dignity. An Eta who took his own life was simply disposing of refuse. A wife could be discarded with a note, A courtesan's contract outlasted her youth. You stand at the edge of your segregated hamlet as night deepens. Lanterns are few here, no festival lights, no processions. The village proper lies across the stream, its lights distant and indifferent. Tomorrow you return to the tanning vats or the execution ground, doing work no one else will touch, sustaining a world that pretends you do not exist. Under the watchful eyes of enforcers in dimly lit courtyards, the fragile balance shatters, revealing a system of retribution that echoes through the night with the finality of steel and sorrow. The law in feudal Japan was never blind. It saw status first, crime second. Punishment followed a strict class principle. The higher your rank, the more honorable your exit was supposed to be. A samurai who committed a grave offense, embezzlement, disloyalty, drawing a sword in the shogun's presence, was often requested to perform seppuku. The request was polite in form, final in fact. Refusal meant the family suffered anyway. For peasants, artisans, or merchants, the same act usually brought public execution. Beheading on a dirt platform before crowds, the head displayed afterward as warning. The difference was deliberate. Seppuku preserved the samurai's dignity and the house's name. Commoner execution humiliated the offender and terrorized the onlookers. Equality before the law did not exist. The system claimed fairness, not through uniformity, but through appropriateness to one's place. The law was not equal, but just for its station. Common methods varied by severity and domain, but several stood out. Decapitation with a katana was standard for capital crimes quick if the executioner was skilled, prolonged, and messy if not. The condemned knelt, hands tied behind, head lowered over a small pit to catch blood. A second often stood ready to finish if the first stroke failed. Crucifixion, tying the body to crossed beams and spearing from both sides, was reserved for particularly heinous acts. Rebellion leaders, Christians caught practicing after the ban, repeat arsonists. The victim could linger for hours or days, a living billboard of the shogunate's reach. Burning alive targeted those who profaned sacred sites or committed mass murder. The fire was built high and slow. Boiling in oil or water rare, but documented in the Sengoku period, and occasionally later was used against spies or traitors in wartime. These were not frequent, but their memory alone deterred. Tamashigiri, test cutting, turned execution into quality control. A freshly forged or suspect blade needed proving. The condemned, usually a criminal already sentenced to death, was trussed and positioned, standing, kneeling, or laid over a mat. The swordsman made one clean stroke through torso, neck, or limbs. A good cut severed multiple bodies stacked together without hesitation. Officials and spectators observed. A poor performance reflected on the blade's maker or the wielder's skill. The practice was pragmatic. Swords were tools of status and survival, but it reduced a human life to a calibration object. Collective punishment amplified deterrence. The principle of enza guilt, by association, applied widely. If one family member committed treason, arson, or serious theft, the entire household could face execution, exile, or enslavement to Eta status. In rebellion cases, entire villages were razed, inhabitants killed or scattered. The logic was preventive. Make the cost personal for everyone nearby. A son hesitated to hide stolen rice, knowing his parents and siblings would pay alongside him. Loyalty became self-preservation. Interrogation relied on torture when confession was needed. The goal was not truth in the modern sense, but admission, any admission to close the case. Common methods included whipping with bamboo, pressing with heavy stones on the chest or thighs, ishidaki, suspension by ropes, forcing limbs into unnatural positions until joints dislocated sumekake, or the slow drip of water on the forehead for days. Women and children were not exempt if implicated. Confessions extracted this way were accepted as valid. Retraction afterward meant nothing. The process was efficient for authorities. Most suspects broke quickly under pain they had no training to resist. Public spectacle was essential. Executions took place at designated grounds Sudzugamori in Edo, Koden Macho, with crowds gathered by order or curiosity. Placards announced the crime. The condemned paraded through streets in humiliation, bound, shaved head, wearing a signboard detailing offences. The display reinforced hierarchy and fear. Samurai watched to remind themselves of their own precarious position. Commoners saw what happened to rule breakers. After beheading, heads were sometimes pickled and exhibited at city gates. The message was clear: step outside your place, and the system crushes without remorse. The entire apparatus existed to maintain order in a society built on fixed roles. Mercy was rare, and calculated a reduced sentence for first offences, or seppuku, instead of crucifixion for high-rank offenders, but always served stability, not justice as we define it. The shogunate did not pretend otherwise. Punishment was theatre, visible, brutal, and calibrated to remind every viewer exactly where they stood. As the courtyard empties and the blood soaks into the earth, the night grows quieter, but the echo of the last stroke lingers, a reminder that rules here were enforced not by debate, but by steel. As storms of conflict rage across fractured lands, visionaries rise from the ashes, forging a fragile peace from the remnants of chaos and the quiet desperation of a weary people. The Sengoku period, roughly 1467 to 1603, was not a short spasm of violence. It lasted over a century, a slow-motion disintegration after the Ashikaga shogunate lost central authority. Daimyo turned warlord fought endlessly for territory, rice fields, castles. Alliances shifted weekly. Betrayal was standard practice. Armies burned villages to deny supplies to enemies, salted fields, massacred garrisons that refused surrender. Peasants were conscripted as ashigaru foot soldiers, armed with spears, or increasingly arquebuses, imported via Portuguese traders after 1543. Casualties mounted into the millions when famine and disease followed every campaign. By the 1570s, the country was exhausted, its population depleted, its economy in ruins. Yet the fighting continued because no one could establish uncontested dominance. Oda Nobunaga broke the deadlock through sheer ruthlessness and tactical innovation. Born 1534 into a minor daimyo family, he seized power in Owari by 1560 after killing his weaker brother. He understood firearms better than most. At Nagashino in 1575, his ashigaru, protected by wooden barricades, fired disciplined volleys into Takeda cavalry, shattering the old mounted warrior paradigm. Nobunaga was the first to deploy matchlocks on a large scale, turning battles into killing fields rather than duels of honor. He also attacked Buddhist institutions that had become armed political players. In 1571, he burned Enryakuji on Mount Hiei, thousands of monks and civilians slaughtered, the complex razed to eliminate a rival power base. Similar massacres followed at other temples. His brutality earned him the nickname Demon King, but it cleared obstacles. By 1582, he controlled much of central Japan. Then, at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, his general Akechi Mitsuhide betrayed him. Surrounded and outnumbered, Nobunaga committed seppuku. The temple burned around his body. He died at 48, having unified nothing permanently, but having shown that old ways could be broken with gunpowder and calculated terror. Toyotomi Hideyoshi rose from the ashes, literally a peasant's son, or so the legend insists. More accurately, a low-born foot soldier who climbed through service to Nobunaga. After Honno, Jihi outmaneuvered rivals, defeated Akechi within weeks, then methodically subdued the rest of Japan by 1590. Hideyoshi's reforms locked in the class system that would define the Edo era. The sword hunt of 1,588 confiscated weapons from peasants and monks, ensuring only samurai carried arms. The separation of classes, edicts fixed occupations. Farmers stayed farmers, samurai stayed warriors, no more fluid mobility between roles. He conducted nationwide land surveys Taiko Kenchi to assess taxable rice yield precisely, tying every field to a lord's kokudaka. Hideyoshi also invaded Korea twice, 1592 and 1597, seeking continental glory. Both campaigns failed disastrously, draining resources and lives. He died in 1598, leaving a 5-year-old heir and a council of regents that immediately fractured. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the patient one, waited. A former hostage of Nobunaga and Hideyoshi, he played loyal vassal while building his base in the Kanto plain. After Hideyoshi's death, the regents split. Ieyasu maneuvered to position himself as arbiter. The decisive clash came at Sekigahara on the 21st of October 1600, arguably the most important battle in Japanese history. Two coalitions faced off, East Army under Ieyasu, West under Ishida Mitsunari, loyal to Hideyoshi's son. Defections mid-battle, most famously Kikawa Hiroi and Kobayakawa Hideaki, switching sides, handed Ieyasu victory. Losses were heavy, but the outcome was total. Ieyasu executed or dispossessed most Western daimyo, redistributed lands to reward loyalists, and in 1603 accepted the title of shogun from the emperor. The Tokugawa Bakufu would rule for 265 years. His reforms completed the tightening. A new land census confirmed and froze kokudaka assessments. Sankin-kotai alternate attendance forced daimyo to maintain expensive residences in Edo, leaving families as hostages and draining provincial treasuries. Class boundaries hardened. Laws prohibited changing profession or residence without permission. Christianity was banned outright after earlier tolerance. Suspected converts faced crucifixion or forced apostasy. Firearms were restricted to the shogunate's arsenal. The peace Ieyasu bought was real. No major civil war until 1868, but it rested on suffocating control. Daimyo were watched through spies, domains ranked and re-ranked, samurai reduced to bureaucrats living on declining stipends. The three unifiers represent progressive stages of closure. Nobunaga smashed the old order with fire and guns. Hideyoshi standardized and stratified society. Ieyasu institutionalized the stasis, making change structurally impossible. Each step narrowed options further, turning a fractured archipelago into a rigidly ordered machine. The cost was freedom, mobility, and for many hope of anything beyond assigned roles. As the last echoes of Sekigahara fade and Edo Castle rises on the horizon, the country enters a long quiet. The wars are over. The chains are fastened tighter than before. In the serene hush of a moonlit garden, reflections unfold on those who endured, revealing how the allure of this distant era captivates us from the safety of our own time. Who survived feudal Japan? Not the defiant, not the brilliant individualists, not the ones who questioned the order. Survival went to those who learned silence, who bowed at the right angle, who kept their heads down and their mouths shut. The peasant who paid his taxes without complaint, the samurai who swallowed humiliation from a capricious lord, the merchant who smiled while being called a leech, the woman who accepted the 3-line divorce letter without protest. These were the ones who reached old age. Heroes died young or spectacularly. The system rewarded conformity, punished deviation, and rewarded those who internalized the rules so deeply they no longer felt the chains. That system delivered 250 years, without large-scale civil war, an extraordinary stretch of stability after the Sengoku bloodbath, but the price was suffocation. No social mobility, no free speech, no personal ambition outside prescribed channels, constant surveillance, collective punishment, ritual suicide as conflict resolution. Peace came at the cost of turning most of the population into cogs in a machine that valued predictability over humanity. We romanticize it anyway. The aesthetic pulls hard. Cherry blossoms against black armor, the quiet precision of a tea bowl, the clean lines of a katana, the stoic face before seppuku. Hollywood and anime amplify the myth. Noble warriors, tragic honor, disciplined beauty. We strip away the starvation, the lead poisoning, the untouchables, the torture yards, the women erased from the hierarchy. We keep the surface elegance and discard the cruelty that sustained it. Why? Because from a distance, it looks like meaning in a world that often feels meaningless. The samurai code seems to offer clarity, duty, loyalty, self-mastery. In reality, it offered obedience or death. The legacy persists. Corporate Japan borrowed Bushido elements, loyalty to the company, endurance, hierarchy, turning salarymen into modern retainers. Zen, once a tool for warriors to face death calmly, becomes secular therapy apps and mindfulness retreats. Samurai appear in every action film, their two swords shorthand for cool restraint. We consume the symbols while ignoring the context that made them necessary. Here is the final point. You would not have survived feudal Japan. Not because you lack courage or grit. Most people there had plenty of both, but because you are modern. You expect choice, mobility, rights, second chances, privacy, equality before the law. Those things did not exist. Dropped into that world, your instincts would get you killed or broken within weeks. The fact that you can live with those expectations is not weakness on their part. It is privilege on yours, one bought by centuries of change they never saw.